Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the burning issues of the day. Nothing is off the table and nobody will be cancelled for saying exactly what they think. Keeping me company today is Mail Plus columnist and commentator Charlie Peters, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. When it comes to headline-grabbing policy announcements, Priti Patel's plans to send illegal migrants to Rwanda has certainly got tongues wagging. But will it work? Russia has now bombed the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, perilously close to Poland and NATO's borders. But Putin had said he was now focused on the country's east. So what does this latest move mean? And all the chatter on the French elections has turned to Le Pen's EU plans as Brussels wades in with accusations of fraud. Clearly they're rattled. But is Frexit really on the cards if she wins? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you need to talk about? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's just 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, the family of a former British army soldier who's been captured by Russian forces in Mariupol, well, his family's urging that he's treated as a prisoner of war in accordance with international rules. Sean Pinner and another captured British national, Aidan Iselin, appeared on Russian state TV today, asking Boris Johnson to help bring them home in exchange for the pro-Russian politician Viktor Medvedchuk. Well, Jason Filajak is a former colleague of both of the soldiers. Earlier, he told me the pair wanted to fight in eastern Ukraine to defend democracy.
I believe in the beginning they said if they found any foreign fighters that they would just treat them as terrorists, which unfortunately we know for Russia is execution on the spot. So we're lucky that these two are still alive. In fact, their social media presence has probably helped keep them alive. But as we see now, they are being used as a Russian mouthpiece for their propaganda.
Russia has renewed its assault on western and southern regions in Ukraine. Lviv's mayor says at least 7 people have been killed after 5 missile strikes hit the city overnight. The country's deputy prime minister says for the second day in a row, no evacuation corridors have been opened. A Ukrainian MP based in Odessa, Oleksiy Goncharo, told GB News that Ukrainian soldiers have ignored a Russian ultimatum to lay down arms in the besieged port city of Mariupol.
Worst situation is in Mariupol, where Ukrainian fighters are continuing to fight and they refuse to surrender. And that is absolutely heroical. But what is the problem that many civilians in the city, they don't have a possibility to leave the city, to save their lives, to come to safety. And that is Russian style of war. Humanitarian catastrophe, war crimes, devastations, terrorizing of the civilians.
The Home Secretary has challenged critics of her plan to send migrants to Rwanda to come up with a better idea. She's written a joint article in The Times with the Rwandan Foreign Minister, and Priti Patel reiterated that her plans were bold and innovative. It's after the leader of the Church of England, Justin Welby, said that the proposals were ungodly and raised serious ethical questions. Well, the Minister for Business, Energy and Climate Change, Greg Hands, told me earlier on GB News that the government is confident the scheme will work.
We're confident that through the different migration laws and immigration laws and police and borders bills that we have and acts that we have over recent years, that this scheme is legal. As I say, it's also a sovereign agreement between two sovereign countries, the UK and Rwanda.
The final coronavirus restrictions in Scotland are lifted today. So there's now no longer a legal requirement to wear a face mask on public transport and in public. From today, the rules move to guidance. Lateral flow tests will no longer be freely available, but they will continue for health and social workers and care workers and for those visiting vulnerable people in care homes or hospitals. As we've been hearing, Scotland's First Minister has been reported to the police after footage posted on social media appeared to show her not wearing a mask indoors at a barber's over the weekend. Nicola Sturgeon posted a video on Twitter of that visit in question. In it, she's wearing a mask as she shaves a man's beard during a council election campaign trail. Well, an SNP spokesperson said the First Minister was invited into the barber's during an outdoor visit on the street. Within a few seconds, she realised she hadn't put her mask back on and immediately put it on. There's more travel chaos expected on the roads and the rails today, with millions of us returning from Easter getaways. The RAC is predicting almost 4 million drivers will make a journey today, causing delays on many major routes. And there are currently queues at Eurostar, particularly for customers in Gare du Nord, after some earlier border control problems. An IT problem that they've had there in Paris that's caused some delays. A Team UK competitor has won gold in the shot put at the Invictus Games. Lisa Johnston said she wanted to show her children anything is possible after becoming an amputee in 2016. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex congratulated and embraced her on the track. You're up to date now on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alex.
When it comes to how effective policies are, the announcement that the government plans to send illegal migrants to Rwanda is already doing exactly what it was designed to do. Oh, don't think for 1 minute this is only about curbing channel crossings. This is also about showing the public that it's not the government's fault. It's everyone else's. And just like clockwork, all of the usual suspects are queuing up to prove exactly that point. The Wets of Whitehall are doing their part by digging their heels in against Priti Patel. The NGOs are crying foul as immigration lawyers are already calculating their fees. Even good old Justin Welby has brought God into the mix to really reinforce that this is all about brave Boris versus the woke. Twitter has come alive with the sound of horrified consternation, bringing in everyone's favourite dog whistles, from human rights to gay persecution to racism to taxpayers' money, while the policy also affords some pretty good optics of twin lecterns, behind which stand a no-nonsense Indian woman and her new African mate doing an international deal. It's a populist's fantasy. The big question is, can fantasy become a reality? Well, joining me now on the show is former Labour media advisor and writer Scarlett Maguire and leader of the SDP, William Colston. Scarlett, I'm going to start with you. The horrified, outbreak of concern about this policy, is it justified?
The real problem with this policy is there is no way of being a legal asylum seeker in Britain. There are no passages to Britain in which you can legally seek asylum. So this whole thing is complete rubbish. I mean, to say only illegals will be sent to Rwanda, yeah, well, that's the only way you can get here. Until there are safe routes, the whole thing is crazy. It's never going to get off the ground. I mean, as you say, it's dog whistle, it's throwing red meat, it's complete and utter madness.
Now, William, the public have wanted the government to get on and do something about these illegal crossings for a long time now, whether it's because they're concerned about the numbers of people coming across and what their intention is, or whether it's from a humanitarian perspective of it's just, frankly, not safe. So surely the government have now come up with something, at least to try and prevent the pull factor.
I applaud the direction of travel. I mean, I think offshore detention is the only way you can deter what's going on in the Channel. But at the start, I take Scarlett's point. I mean, you've got to have routes that are legal and are under our democratic control. And the thing that the Channel chaos proves is that the people that get across the Channel are not the most deserving migrants. I mean, many of them are economic migrants anyway, not genuine refugees. And I don't think you can be a genuine refugee in the proper sense from France. So I applaud the government trying to do it. There are three main reasons why their plan probably won't succeed, which we can go into. But I applaud them for having a go.
I mean, Scarlett, they have had a go, haven't they? And this has been a problem dragging on for a long time. So many plans have sort of crept out of the government, from using the Navy to negotiating with the French and giving them a load of money to patrol the beaches, and nothing seems to have worked. So it might seem desperate on the outside, but there are other countries doing this, aren't there?
Look, the reason that we have small boats crossing the Channel is it's the only way people can get into Britain to claim asylum. So we have a choice. We can say we are a country that will not take in refugees. End of story, right? And instead we pretend that it's all about trying to save lives. So actually, it's really, really easy. If we want to stop the small boats coming across, we can say, if you are a genuine refugee, come to us and we will make sure you can get to Britain. But at the moment, that doesn't happen. Nobody can get here. There is no route for a genuine refugee. So they have these big things like Rwanda that is just never going to work. I mean, who's going to be sent there? And also, I mean, it's completely what they're saying is, even if you get accepted as a refugee in Rwanda, you'll never get back to Britain. So it's not. The whole thing is smoke and mirrors. But what's really important is, if we take being a haven for refugees seriously, then we have to look at how we get to the genuine refugees, and then the channel crossings will mostly stop.
Well, this is the problem, isn't it, William? Because, you know, as Scarlett was saying, we might not have any legal passages for people to apply for asylum in the UK. But what Priti Patel keeps saying to those who are criticising this plan is, OK, you come up with a better idea. And this is the problem, isn't it? No one seems to have a better idea.
Well, the SDP has a better idea. Go on the website and have a look at it. I mean, offshore detention will work, but it's got to be 100%. The Australians have proved that. You have to have anyone unsolicited arriving on your border must be deported, basically. That will work, and it's been proved to work. I mean, seaborne migration, illegal migration to Australia doesn't exist now because they were determined to do it. So the first flaw in the government's proposal is that some people will be taken to Rwanda. Well, it won't work then. I mean, you'll just change the nature of the flow. Probably you'll get more women and children in the Channel. I don't accept at all Scarlett's point. I think the reason that people cross the Channel is that they've got a 99.8% chance of staying here. I mean, it's a surefire way of getting into the UK and staying. And the government have to have a look at this. You know, near 30,000 people came last year illegally. There'll be 60 or 70 or 80,000 this year if nothing else changes. You've got to change the offer. Unless the offer is changed, the migrants in the Channel are acting perfectly rationally, given the incentives that we give them presently, and that must change.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting point, isn't it, Scarlett? I'm with you on some level that we haven't really set up any sort of viable alternative. But the point is, and William's right about this, so far what's happened is there has been this pull factor, because once people have set foot on UK shores, there are all these long-winded legal processes, and they do end up staying here. They do get what they want. But do you think that it's plausible that when the human traffickers are going around the villages and towns of beleaguered countries saying, you know, pay us a whole load of money, we'll guarantee you safe passage and you'll be able to stay when you get to the other side, that people say, oh no, actually I saw on my mobile phone I might end up in Rwanda?
I think it could have a small point, but I mean, if you really want to stop it, you have to be more rigid. But the problem is, I mean, the Home Office visa, we've seen from the Ukrainians, right? It just doesn't work. I mean, 2/3 of the people actually crossing the channel are, and this isn't the so there are two ways of people trafficking. The serious way is actually you put people in a lorry, as those poor Vietnamese were, and you bring them over, and then the other way is people make their way to Calais and they find ways onto small boats. They're very, very different. The people on the small boats tend to be refugees. 2/3 of them are found to be refugees and allowed to stay here. So actually, the system doesn't work. The Home Office is not working at the moment at all, as we saw with the Ukrainians. I mean, actually, if Priti Patel would actually get a system working, we might have some hope. And instead, it's all shiny things. It's this government. This government loves big, shiny things. They don't have to work. They don't ever have to be put into practice, because this one really isn't going to be. But actually, what is wrong is there are structural problems within the Home Office.
Wonderful to have your company today, Scarlett Maguire and William Clouston. We've run out of time on this debate with you, but thank you for joining me. Well, joining me in the studio throughout my show today is broadcaster and writer Charlie Peters, and our political correspondent Tom Harwood is also here. So, Charlie, I'm going to come to you first. This has proven very popular with the public, according to certain polls. Where do you stand on this?
Long overdue. I mean, since 2015, the number of forced returns, leaving people being forced out of the country after having a dodgy immigration record, has been plummeting, absolutely falling down in its troves. I mean, last year, it was low four figures in terms of forced returns. I mean, these are rookie numbers that we absolutely need to pump up. And it's wild. I mean, the number of work-related visas, family-dependent visas, study visas, that's rocketing in the other direction. So despite all the fuss about this hostile environment and the most right-wing Home Secretary in years, decades even, nothing seems to be happening in terms of deporting people who illegally come into Britain.
Now, Tom, do you think this will actually happen? Will the flights take off and land in Kigali or wherever and ship largely young migrant men, illegal migrant men, out of the country into Rwanda? Or do you think that this isn't going to get off the ground?
Well, it will take some time to get off the ground, not least because, as the government said when they announced the policy, they're expecting some pretty sizable legal challenges to this. This will be going through the courts for quite some time. However, a great deal of money is being given to the Rwandan government. The facilities are being set up in Rwanda. It seems like there is genuine preparation for this to go ahead. However, I think I will pick up what's been said about the public opinion polls in response to this, because when specifically Rwanda is mentioned, rather than the idea of offshore processing, as has been done in several surveys previously, when Rwanda specifically is mentioned, it seems that this policy is less popular, that more people oppose it than are in favour of it. And potentially that's because in the minds of Britons, there is the troubles that this country went through 30 years ago. Of course, the genocide that is so far at the front of people's minds. Potentially, people are thinking that this isn't quite the country that many people know it to be now, which is quite a progressive country, all things considered. But yes, seriously, some practicalities and some issues with regard to getting this policy off the ground. And it's debatable as to whether this is actually as popular as the government thought it might be.
Tom, Charlie, thank you so much. What do you think about all of this? Do you think it's a wacky idea? Is it just plain balmy? Do you want to see it happen, or do you have reservations that, well, it's just a big headline grabber, but is it actually going to work? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us about it at gbnews. Now, Parliament's back tomorrow, and after that lovely long chocolate egg munching break where MPs got to convey heartfelt Easter messages and pick their side over the new immigration policy, Partygate is roaring back. Sue Gray's silver bullet of a scathing report is still on ice, however, as we're now waiting for the police to finish their work, giving Tory backbenchers even more long grass in which to hide their spineless forms while they wait for the direction of the winds to change. But rumour has it Boris will address Parliament on the matter, still clinging to protestations of innocence, before flying off to India to do more important things. Well, let's get the latest by going back to GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. So, school's back tomorrow for MPs and Partygate is clearly on the agenda. What's going to happen?
It certainly is. The Prime Minister will deliver a statement tomorrow that will probably cover more than just Partygate. This will be a statement that encompasses really where the government is at. Not only talking about Partygate, but addressing the cost of living, addressing the situation in Ukraine as well. There's been criticism, not least from the senior Labour MP Chris Bryant, that the Prime Minister should do 3 separate statements at the very least, not all this piled together in one. But the idea potentially from Number 10 here is to say, yes, mistakes were made. The Prime Minister, of course, saying that he did not believe these events to be against the rules at the time, something that I think he does have a case for, of course, given that the Number 10 press operation literally briefed out this party that has received a fine to the press at the time. It appeared in the Times the day after. This wasn't something that Downing Street tried to hide, potentially something that Downing Street thought was within their rules. Clearly, the Met Police now disagree. So clearly the Prime Minister will be contrite about that, will be expressing sorrow and potentially a little bit of bafflement about this fine, but also crucially moving forward, saying what's going on next. Of course, a big international visit, as you rightly mentioned, the first visit to India that this Prime Minister has made as Prime Minister, really big international issues. And of course, as we are getting almost daily now, the readouts from those phone calls with President Zelensky, someone that Boris Johnson has formed quite a close partnership and indeed friendship with in the last few months, focusing on those global issues, appearing as a statesman who's rising above the fray of parochial political intrigue. This will be the plan of the Prime Minister tomorrow.
It does seem to me, Charlie, that, this has been all about running down the clock from the beginning in the hope that, that the ball will sort of go out of touch and everyone's moved on because there are bigger things on the agenda. But there are people who don't want to let it go.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen some interesting polling recently in terms of experts reacting to focus groups, looking at the top words that come out when you discuss this with members of the public. The top word seems to be liar. This is finally cutting through, I think, after decades of misgivings from the Prime Minister, that he is sometimes sloppy with the truth and he likes to navigate awkwardly around what's actually happening. And now this has caught up with him, I think, and he is relying on the resistance of brave men and women on the Eastern Front in Ukraine to give him good headlines.
And is that right, though? Do you think that it's reasonable to say there are bigger issues at stake here? I mean, there was a huge amount of outrage when this first happened, and I think a lot of people would be united in thinking that fibbing certainly took place, with the initial reaction saying, of course, this never happened. But is it right, given where we are? I mean, politics has moved on, and there are big fish to fry at the moment. So is it right that we do or say, well, let's leave that in the past now, let bygones be bygones?
Well, big fish to fry, but limited hope that this government will be efficient at frying them. I mean, economic crisis is going to be an absolute disaster, and the Chancellor doesn't seem to have even the slightest awareness of the effect that this is going to have. But also, just more broadly, I mean, all these issues piling up, the government doesn't have a serious direction. It relies on, changing the conversation with looking abroad in order to get ahead of the news headlines. Actually, we want to move on from this conversation, but I think we should take the time to look back and say, were these rules right? Was the punitive attitude that we had on people appropriate? And everyone wants to look back with scorn at the Prime Minister's behaviour, but actually perhaps we should give a more critical eye to the rules that he failed to ensure himself.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, you do get the impression, don't you, that, it's a constant waiting game, isn't it? First of all, well, let's see what the Sue Gray report says. Oh, then let's see what the Met Police say. Now, well, let's continue to see what the Met Police say or do before Sue Gray can publish her report. What's the best betting that report gets eaten by the dog at some point?
Well, reportedly, Sue Gray is fairly frustrated that her report has not yet been able to be published. Of course, the Met Police investigation rolls on, and it was the thing that hobbled that report in the first place. Let's not forget she did publish a version, a very much slimmed-down version of her report as the police investigation got underway. But as the police have not concluded their investigation, as they comb through the mountains of evidence that they have been provided with. I suppose one argument on the side of Number 10 here is that the Met Police has taken quite a long time to decide what constitutes a party, what constitutes as something that was reasonably necessary for work, where is the difference here? Of course, Boris Johnson did stay at home for all of these parties. These were all in his home, whether we call them parties or not. When does a meeting turn into a social gathering? When is it reasonably necessary for work? Does work work also include the idea of respite? There are lots of questions here, and not all of this is as clear-cut as sometimes the headlines make out. But clearly, there are going to be more fines issued.
Yeah.
The bar was low for that first one. We're going to see some more, and then, finally, once that is concluded, let's hope that Sue Gray can finally get her report out.
Let's hope so indeed. Thank you both. A lot of nuance indeed with what constitutes a party, but it's not lost on me that we didn't get the opportunity to, well, really bank that nuance ourselves when they came around with fixed penalty notices. You're with GB News on TV and digital radio. After the break, as Russia extends rocket attacks further into Ukraine, we'll cross live to the west of the country for the very latest. But first, let's get a check on the weather forecast.
Well, let's look ahead to this evening's weather. The UK's looking mostly fine in the southeast, but rather showery in the north and the west. Let's take a look at the details. There's still going to be showers across the southwest of England. These will be bright and there'll be some sunny spells that should develop, giving a fine end to the day. The southeast is going to hold on to some of the best of the weather. Here it will be dry and bright and still feeling pleasantly warm in light winds. There'll be a mixture of bright spells and well-scattered showers, particularly in Wales. We can see in Cardiff there, highs of about 14 degrees today. That will start to cool down as we head towards the evening. Southern parts of the country now, and we can expect to see some of the brightest weather here. Any isolated showers can't be ruled out as we head into the Midlands, especially in the west. But in most places, we should get away with a fine end to the day. In the northeast, there's going to be a fair amount of sunshine on the cards, heralding a dry and pleasant end to the bank holiday weekend across the region. Now, across Scotland, it's a bit of an east to west split likely here. It's going to be breezy and showery in the west, especially across the northwest, while sunny spells will dominate further east. Across Northern Ireland, it's going to be a mixed end to the day. There'll be some bright weather at times, but showers will continue to develop, the odd one possibly quite heavy. A few showers then are going to continue overnight, especially in the northwest. Over the course of the day, that's how the weather's shaping up today and into tomorrow morning.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Alex Phillips on GB News. In a moment, we're crossing live to western Ukraine for the latest on the Russian rocket attacks. Plus, I'll be crossing to France for an update on the war of words between the European Union and Marine Le Pen. I'll be chewing all of that over with Charlie Peters. But first, it's time for the news headlines.
It's 2:28. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The family of a former British army soldier who was captured by Russian forces in the city of Mariupol is urging that he's treated as a prisoner of war in accordance with international rules. Sean Pinner and another captured British national appeared on Russian state TV today, asking Boris Johnson to help bring them home in exchange for the pro-Russian politician Viktor Medvedchuk. Well, Jason Filajak is a former colleague of both soldiers. Earlier, he told me the pair wanted to fight in eastern Ukraine to defend democracy.
I believe in the beginning they said if they found any foreign fighters that they would just treat them as terrorists, which unfortunately we know for Russia is execution on the spot. So we're lucky that these two are still alive. In fact, their social media presence has probably helped keep them alive. But as we see now, they are being used as a Russian mouthpiece for their propaganda.
A 29-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after two police officers were confronted by a man with a knife in Westminster this morning. No injuries have been reported, and the incident is not being treated as terror-related. Shanghai is reporting that 3 people infected with coronavirus died yesterday. It's the first time the Chinese city has reported deaths among coronavirus patients since it entered lockdown in March. In Scotland, the final coronavirus restrictions have been lifted. People are no longer legally required to wear face masks on public transport and in indoor public spaces. From today, the rules move to guidance only. Thousands of volunteers who joined the coronavirus vaccination programme have now got permanent jobs in the NHS. The Health Secretary says it's a positive boost to the service, which is struggling with staff shortages and a backlog caused by the pandemic. You're now up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex.
As perhaps we all start to get a bit ambivalent about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, having spent weeks praising the Ukrainians' resistance and fawning over images of a sunken warship, Putin seems determined to keep the West on its toes, striking the city of Lviv on the border of Poland, which until today was largely unscathed, cocooned perhaps by its proximity to the NATO frontier, while strategists reassured us Putin was focusing his new efforts on the east. Volodymyr Zelensky is again warning that Putin wouldn't even wince at the idea of broadening his campaign to neighbouring countries and resorting to nuclear weapons, while the Austrian Chancellor, having visited Moscow, has told the world that Putin genuinely believes he's winning the war. Well, only Putin knows how long he is prepared to keep plugging away and to what lengths he will go, while Europe is still essentially funding his atrocities to the tune of €1 billion a day in energy deals. One thing is for sure, though, if anyone thought this was coming to an end, it really isn't anytime soon. Meanwhile, Finland and Sweden are pushing to join NATO, with Russia warning it would deploy nuclear weapons if they even dared to think it. It may be taking a while, but one thing is true. Putin is still seemingly running rings around his foes. Well, joining me now from Western Ukraine is journalist Stefan Weichert. Now, Stefan, we heard that Russia has hit Lviv with several missiles today. So what's the situation like in Western Ukraine right now? It was sort of seen to be a rather safe place, and lots of journalists were congregated there. This must have shocked a lot of people.
It definitely have. I mean, it has been, as you point out, been kind of seen as this kind of safe haven within the war zone, right, where you could be relatively safe. The attacks we have seen in Western Ukraine have mainly been, towards military targets and mainly out of the bigger cities, like airfields, etc. But now people are really worried, well, this is changing. And for example, just in this city where I'm at now, we are getting like these kind of flyers sent out warning against what to do in case of a chemical or nuclear attack. So, people are really scared here, like getting these kind of flyers in all mailboxes, and then with what happened today in Lviv, people are generally scared.
And yeah, has this changed the narrative in the Ukraine about the situation with the war? I mean, Zelensky puts out a national address every single night to encourage people, and there's been a lot of positive propaganda at Ukrainians' resistance to Putin's offensives. But has this sort of really made people take a step back and think, actually, it's getting pretty perilous again?
I think that's too early to say, but I think what I'm experiencing when I'm talking to Ukrainians is that this belief that they are going to win, this belief that, in the end, Russia will lose and Ukraine will prevail, that is continuing. We see that in the opinion polls, and we see that also when I'm talking to people on the street. They generally believe that they're winning. I went to a funeral of a 19-year-old soldier here in Western Ukraine who died around Kiev. And, his mother was even saying that if she could choose again, she would actually send her son to war. She did, of course, think it was very sad that her son, 19-year-old son, died defending Ukraine. But she said that she loved the country just as much as she loved her son. And if she should send him to war again, she would do so.
Now, we know as well that a lot of humanitarian corridors have once again been closed down and are being used, in fact, in sort of negotiations to release certain Russian prisoners of war. What's the mood like of the general public now in Western Ukraine, who until this point, I'd imagine a lot of them have stayed put? But given things like the leaflets, if you could actually show us that leaflet again and hold it up in front of the camera so we can have a look at it, warning people about the sort of, atrocities that could be lying in wait. Is this making people pack their bags and try and get to safety?
That's the big question. I mean, we have to see whether that's going to happen. What we have to understand is that around 10 million Ukrainians have fled from the war so far, but the majority, around 6 million, have internally displaced. That means they are still in Ukraine, and they are mainly in Western Ukraine. What we have to see is that if these Russian attacks increases in the West, whether some of these people would actually consider moving abroad. That could basically just mean that we're going to have even more refugees in the EU, even more refugees in Poland, potentially in the UK, and also in Denmark, for example, where I'm from.
Stefan, it's fantastic to have you on the programme. You, of course, were shot yourself some time ago, so do please stay safe. We want to be able to carry on talking to you and to get the latest of what's going on in Ukraine. That's Stefan Weisshirt there. Well, joining me now on the show is former senior military intelligence officer and former NATO planner, Philip Ingram. Now, Philip, there are a few suggestions that Putin is becoming increasingly desperate and could possibly strike a NATO base soon. And it seems to me that this targeted approach now right up near the border of Poland, and accusations as well that NATO could be behind the sinking of the ship, the Movska, that he seems to be wanting to ramp up tensions with NATO.
Oh, his war of words is saying that, but you have to remember Putin is losing. He's lost his operational objectives so far. He's failed to topple the Ukrainian government. He's failed to capture Kiev. He has failed to stop NATO expansion, and he's failed to further fracture the EU. And he's actually bringing it all together. He's now realizing, I think, that his military are having difficulty building up for this massive push that would be the change of direction from the southeast, and it's taking longer than he wants. And he needs to be able to fly a flag of success somewhere. So what he's trying to do is suggest that he can run rings around Ukraine and suggest that he can threaten the West. But he's a frightened little man now.
If he's a frightened little man, is it not time then that NATO really calls his bluff? Because it's still the case that Zelensky is having to make constant appeals for more weaponry. This could drag on for a long time, resulting in numerous losses of life. And should we be allowing Putin to continue to call the shots if he's in such a weak position?
Well, that's the real difficulty. He's in a weak position in what he's managing to actually physically achieve inside Ukraine. He's losing. Ukrainian farmers are having better success than Russian military are. However, whenever it comes to being able to play on the bigger stage, he's still got that big nuclear stick. And people say we shouldn't be worried about it. Actually, we must be worried about it because whenever you corner a rat and it's injured and you keep poking it, it will come out fighting and do the thing that you least expect. Putin doesn't want to bring NATO into it. He knows that he can't win. So it's unlikely that he will target a NATO base conventionally or with chemical or nuclear weapons or anything else. But he's got an awful lot more that he can do inside Ukraine. And one of them is keep the pressure up for months, if not years, or expand it into the use of tactical weapons of mass destruction in some way to try and send a message saying, come and negotiate. I want out of this.
So the risk here actually is if NATO seem to continue to threaten Putin, the people who are going to be on the receiving end of his reaction will likely be the Ukrainians. So where does that leave us with the position that now Finland and Sweden are asking to join the defensive alliance? Should they, or is that just going to be provocative?
Well, it'll be provocative, but Putin won't do anything about it apart from words. He might resort to a stiff letter and moving some military equipment if he's got any left up near some of the borders with Finland. But if they join, that'll send a very clear message to him and those that understand the politics that he's definitely failed. And again, Ukraine has applied, or I think has just completed the application form to join the EU. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out in Putin's rhetoric that's coming in. Putin just doesn't know where to turn at the moment. He's having real difficulty. And this is where our Western leaders are in a very difficult position. We have to keep doing as much as we can. And it's right that President Zelensky keeps asking for more and more and more, because he has to get that message to his own people, as well as those countries that aren't necessarily supporting Ukraine as much as they could be. But our Western leaders have to be very careful that we give as much as we can without stimulating an overreaction from a very wounded Putin.
Philip, it's always fantastic getting your insights. It's a privilege to have you on the show once again. That's Philip Ingram, who's a former senior military intelligence officer and NATO planner. Well, let's get Charlie's thoughts on this. Charlie, are you sort of getting to the stage where you want to see NATO do more? I mean, it's all very well sending weapons, but the EU's still paying his bills.
Absolutely do not want NATO to do more in terms of deployments of live military personnel. I think the current strategy of sending equipment, kit, tanks, anti-tank rockets, this is great. Russian armour is struggling, and it will only get more difficult for them to manoeuvre throughout the country as the weather turns against them, and we should do everything we can to support the Ukrainian military to continue that fight. And I think many strategists were right to note that Russia was going to evade, but including myself, we got it wrong when we thought that they were going to march their way to victory within a month. The alternative has turned out to be true. They have really struggled to get ahead. I think the risk now is that as the conflict moves more to the east and they focus on those supposedly Russian supporting regions, which have not turned out to be Russian supporting, it'll be more difficult to resupply the Ukrainian military, which has suffered enormous losses. So no NATO personnel deployed in the country to fight, but absolutely more support, more tanks, more weapons, more armour.
Charlie, thank you very much. You're with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. After the break, Marine Le Pen accuses the EU of coming to the aid of Emmanuel Macron in the French election, as Brussels accuses her of misusing European Parliament funds. So those people being in the European Parliament but on the wrong side know that very well. We'll have the latest. See you shortly.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
For those following the French elections, which seems to be everyone, given that it's the latest prism through which we're expected to make a tribal commitment to a hoped-for outcome, you will have been told that Marine Le Pen is narrowing the gap to Macron more than ever before. And this will have an existential impact on France, and most importantly, the EU. Well, it seems the headlines might be right, as Brussels has used its favourite weapon, Olaf. No, not the hapless snowman from Frozen, but its anti-fraud agency, to try to scupper her progress. On one hand, Le Pen has reversed dizzyingly from once firmly held Eurosceptic beliefs espousing Brexit to quitting the Eurozone to her current position of reform from the inside. But her menu of crowd-pleasing policies would require the sort of treaty change the EU simply won't countenance. Remember when David Cameron went to Brussels with his grovelling shopping list of minor concessions in the hope of killing off Euroscepticism and got laughed out of the room? Well, we all know how that ended, don't we? So maybe the EU has learnt its lesson. For anyone who has ever opposed the EU while being connected to it, the interview under police caution amidst allegations of fraud is almost a rite of passage. The profligate organisation that gives not a moment to dodgy dealings of commissioners on oligarchs' yachts will count the cost of every paperclip if you deign to challenge its authority. Well, joining me now on the show is leader of France's Génération Frexit group, Charles-Henri Gallois. Charles-Henri, fantastic to have you on the show. Now, there's a load of talk about if Marine Le Pen wins, whether this could lead to Frexit, but she doesn't really hold the same position on the EU as she used to, and people are saying, well, that's because the French don't really want Frexit.
I mean, you're right on this. She has changed his mind about the EU. I mean, she does it certainly because of political reason. Maybe she thinks the French people won't leave it, but I think it's quite a pity that she did not include, as in 2017 referendum on EU membership, because we ordered a poll on February, and it says that 63% of the French people are willing to get a referendum on EU membership. Then maybe if you ask now to the French people whether they want to leave or not, maybe today they won't say no, but I'm pretty sure that if we have this referendum and if we have a proper debate about it, it will end exactly as in the UK, and I think Brexit will win. Then Marine Le Pen, as you said in your introduction, actually, if she is elected, she will face issue with the EU because you cannot apply a manifesto within the EU. So there are two solutions. She does Tsipras, I mean, she caves in and she won't do anything, or she fights, and I mean it will lead to this EU referendum. So let's see. But anyway, as a Frenchman and living 5 years with Macron, I think that everyone want to get rid of Macron. I mean, this political campaign, the weirdest I have ever seen, because Macron refused to campaign at all. He used the Ukraine war to not campaign at all, so we didn't have a proper campaign, a proper debate, and he has just entered into campaign for this second round, and his only argument, it's not to say anything he has done right, because 5 years was a disaster, but he just say Marine Le Pen is far right, so you cannot vote for Marine Le Pen, she is far right, and you have all the mainstream media in France that are selling this idea. So it's really we are facing a huge propaganda to get Macron re-elected, just saying Marine Le Pen is far right. But actually, when you look at the manifesto, the most extremist manifesto is Macron 1, because we know what will happen if Macron is re-elected. It will lead to the destruction of France within the EU. Maybe we'll want to share, for example, our seat in the Security Council of the United Nations. Maybe we want to share our nuclear weapons with Germany and with the European Union. Macron also is very extremist, let's say, in his economic policies. He wants to have the pension to 65, which is very, let's say, extremist for French people. And when you look at the poll, there's 3/4 of the French people that don't want it. So he is quite radical in his policies. And that's why maybe it can be closer to what the polls or, let's say, what happened in 2017.
Well, we'll soon find out, won't we? Charles-Henri Gallois, fantastic having you on the show, and vive le Frexit, I say. Well, Charlie, I'm going to come back to you. So Charles-Henri there saying that 63% of French people do actually want to be given a say, a referendum. That doesn't mean 63% of people want to leave. Do you think that this election, certainly in the frame of British media, is being played out a bit like a Frexit referendum, isn't it? Right, yeah. But do you think that is the big issue of the day in France?
No, I think the conservation of France as a country is the big issue in France, overrun by immigration, declining economically, so it's falling apart. And I think that Europe is going to be the battleground for the right for the next decade or so. Countries like Hungary and Poland clinging on to their identity where they can, trying to be outwardly conservative, and now France has a shot of doing the same. And I think that any right-thinking conservative should lead their support to people who try and give out those actions.
Charlie, thank you. Now, something very special post-Easter. For those of you who remember those early days of GB News, when our tech was about as trustworthy as a Kremlin press release and the mob was hell-bent on cancelling us, you may remember we got through it all with some communal catharsis, ranting about the world in all of its illogical horror. Having been laid low recently in a sweaty, flu-ridden stupor, I know I still sound like Madge Bishop, going down all those Twitter wormholes in the land before Elon. I think it's time we brought it back, don't you? So settle down for a collective therapy session. For today marks the resurrection of the Alex agenda. Now, first thing to get off my chest, apart from significant amounts of phlegm. Anybody who's seen the government's white paper on food security, well, they would have read that importing stuff is getting a bit tricky with the war in Ukraine, while EU fanatics will tell you they were right all along about vegetables rotting in the fields because lazy Brits just won't pick them. Well, it is partly true, as we don't have as many migrant fruit pickers as before. So the Environment Secretary, Eustace, has proposed we get a workforce of robots to get the job done. Has he not had a chat with Pretty? Because the other side of the government seems to want to send a 25,000-strong force of healthy migrant men to East Africa. Stands to reason even Justin Welby might agree with my plan, given that the first book of the Bible says God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. Now, that's what I call food for thought. Now, anyone else super bored of the game of catch politicians breaking their own rules? Oh, how the righteous radio and telefolk on certain other channels are exercised today as Nicola Sturgeon forgot to put her McFace nappy on for all of 5 wee moments. The same media lambasting her for forgetting that COVID only spreads when upright and walking through somewhere rather than sitting down would be the first to call for muzzles to be brought back. I propose that any journalist bleating about mask offences should be made to wear one permanently. You never know. It might even improve the quality of their broadcasting. A Sussex NHS trust has joined the ranks of the imbecilic by publishing guidance on having to say front hole rather than the V word that nobody's allowed to use anymore lest it offends someone who doesn't like naming genitals. Apparently for birthing humans who don't identify as women, pointing out that their baby is going to come out of their female genitalia may prove traumatic. At this point, I actually think these organisations want to induce mental illness in people. It stands to reason to me that if correct terminology causes a significant mental breakdown, you probably aren't cracked up to being a parent. And it's high time the NHS prioritised safeguarding over encouraging neuroses, frankly, being promoted by the Chinese spyware app TikTok. And France. Oh, yes. We've all just been exposed to Macron's torse poilu, or man rug, to you and I. His private toggy has snapped him in a behind-the-scenes state of unbuttoned relaxation. There he is, where it appears he's actually wearing a hair shirt, apparently in order to woo younger voters. Last time I checked, the youth were more into androgyny than a Sean Connery-worthy Darwin sweater. But a closer look at that thing, look at it, strangely defined borders on that fuzz, makes me wonder if it is indeed a hairy chest or an actual hair shirt. It could possibly perhaps be part of a Gallic Easter self-flagellation ritual to encourage Conservative voters away from Le Pen. Well, I decided to conduct some super accurate research on whether Macron's manliness is hot or not, in the form, of course, of a Twitter poll. And it turns out that hairy chests are now out. So maybe Emmanuel should keep his firmly inside his shimmies. Well, let's get Charlie's thoughts on all of it. Charlie, what did you pick up from my little exposition there?
I am not paid enough to talk about Emmanuel Macron's chest, and so I will choose not to. Goodness, we'll start with the robots. I'm surprised you're opposed. I thought this was exciting innovation to curb a problem that Britain's struggling with.
We've got a problem with not enough migrants, apparently, to pick fruit, but we've also got a problem with too many migrants that we have to send them to Rwanda. So, to me, could just join a few dots, surely.
Well, the people who arrive here illegally, then being put to work in the fields, they'll never leave. And so you have this crisis where, if you're wanting to deal with incentives to prevent people from crossing the channel, offering them seasonal work, that's something of a pretty good incentive to me, especially as they're increasing their pay, because they can't find anyone to fill the jobs. So I'm afraid, Alex, this is part of the agenda that I'm not signing up to.
Oh, Charlie, you disappoint me. Now, what about this whole Sussex NHS Trust? It's Brighton. Would you believe it's Brighton?
Shocking.
Who'd have thunk?
Shocking.
You can't say the V word or many other words. I don't think you can even say breast milk anymore, let alone mother. I mean, Lord help us. But it's crazy. Surely this is just NHS Trust trolling people and trying to make them go crazy.
This is, I think, I'm sorry to criticise you again, but I think that's the wrong perspective to handle these problems.
Charlie, you're going to come back on this show, Charlie.
Look, they sincerely and genuinely believe these things. It is wrong to term them as trolling or them trying to be nasty and catch out Conservatives. They genuinely believe that people who give birth might not be women. And so we do ourselves a disservice to call them insane or trolling. These people really do believe this. And if we're ever going to fight back in favour of biology and perhaps even the truth, then we're going to take them seriously.
Now, what else did we talk about? I've forgotten already with my flu-addled brain. You're going to have to talk about Macron's chest hair, because it's the one that stands out to me.
I'm sure there was something else.
Oh, well, you know, you're on thin ground now, because you can't remember. Come on, so chest hair in or out? I mean, not in or out of the shirt, but... not in or out of the shirt. Look, do you think that's actual chest hair?
I think it is. There's an extraordinary contrast between the neck and the chest, which does lead, perhaps, to supporting your perspective on the hair shirt. God, this is really happening, isn't it?
This is.
I would say that he looks very French, and that is the politest way I can comment on his current display. 2 phones there, which every smart man needs, so that's good to see. One for business, one for pleasure. Good for Emmanuel.
There you are, Charlie. It's been a delight. Next time, learn to agree with me more, and then we might even pay you more. You never know. Well, that's about it. It was nice having that little moment back again. Let me know if you want me to carry on doing it, or if that was just a horror show for you. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Tom Harwood. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News, same time, same place, 2 o'clock tomorrow. First of all, though, let's have a cheeky little peek at the weather. Bye-bye.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it. Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone.
We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to